Hi, I'm Josh. This week on Make It, we'll be talking with photojournalist Katie Orlinsky about her process for finding stories and connecting with people around the world. Let's go chat with Katie. Hey, Katie.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. Welcome to the show. Thanks a lot for coming down today, or coming all the way from New York. That's amazing.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate having you out here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Cool. I've had a chance to look at a lot of your wonderful photos, and I know what you do, but there's probably a lot of people that may not have been yet acquainted with your work. Can you help me understand a little bit about who you are and then talk about what kind of photography you do?
Sure. I'm a photojournalist and documentary photographer. I live in New York City, but I photograph stories all over the world. Most recently, or for the past 3 years, focusing on environmental issues and climate change in Alaska. And I'm doing a project about subsistence hunting and how that's being challenged due to warming weather and melting sea ice. So trying to look at the human stories behind these environmental issues that we hear so much about.
Awesome. And so you're, as a photojournalist, how do you make your living?
You know, I make a living off of doing editorial assignment photography, some commercial work, and then through grants to support and fund these personal projects that I do, like this work in Alaska. And I still work some for newspapers. I still work a bit for the New York Times. Now I'm working more with National Geographic and with some other magazines.
Wow, that must be really awesome. So I've definitely talked to a bunch of Nat Geo photographers, and it seems like the first thing you get asked is, how do I become a Nat Geo photographer?
It's definitely not one sort of a path. I think the only thing that I've noticed that, you know, photographers that work for National Geographic or for, you know, for anywhere, or just the thing that we all share is that we're really passionate about photography, but we also care a lot about the story behind what the photos are about.
So what was your first photographic obsession?
My first photographic obsession was definitely Mexico.
Mexico.
Yeah. So I moved to Mexico after college and kind of became a photographer there. Was working for the local newspaper, El Noticias de Oaxaca, this tiny little paper. But then this conflict broke out, and I covered it and started getting just more and more involved in covering social issues and kind of touching upon more sort of conflict-based photojournalism. And then the drug war came around, and then I got pretty obsessed with that. So I was living in New York, but traveling back and forth to Mexico as often as possible to document that.
So a woman from America coming down and poking her nose in all the drug war business. I'm sure that you weren't that.
Yeah, I did not stand out at all.
Not at all.
No, I mean, the interesting thing about that issue is that it's really dangerous for Mexican journalists, and it was not nearly as dangerous for foreign journalists. So I stand out, you know, like working on that story or working on the story I'm working on now, and you know, but that's all I know. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what it's like to blend in. So
right.
That's how I work.
Did you learn anything about like working in Mexico that really stood out that you wouldn't have known otherwise?
Well, so I'd lived there in the past, but you know, I hadn't been living in the areas that were sort of touched the most by the drug war. But the way I focused on it was looking at the innocent victims of the war. So I actually was doing most of it about women and children and people sort of caught in the crossfire of it. So, I mean, yeah, I learned a ton just about sort of, I don't know, all of these stories that we see in the news and all of these kind of awful situations that we see. There's, you know, people just going about their daily lives still living there. And I feel like those are kind of the important stories to look at because it, you know, fosters empathy for the people and will make more people care about the issues.
Right. How did you get from shooting in Mexico for the Noticias de Oaxaca to shooting for National Geographic? What was that? What was your pathway like?
I kind of went from covering Mexico and working a lot for newspapers, and then slowly doing more magazine work. But I would just kind of find stories and pursue them on my own, and then either, you know, kind of start the project on my own and then a publication would pick it up or partner up with an NGO. But it kind of, everything came from me being interested in the story. It wasn't really somebody telling me, oh, go shoot that.
Self-driven, right?
Yeah, you got to be self-driven, and, you know, you kind of have to make your own opportunities.
Did you find that like at this point you can just sit back and people come to you, or are you still actively canvassing
both.
And trying to get like stories?
Yeah, definitely both. I think, you know, now I've been doing this, you know, for over 10 years, so people will think of me for certain stories. But I still pitch all the time, or I'll hear about, like, recently, last summer, there was the first ever cruise to sail the Northwest Passage. So people were calling it the climate change cruise because, never before had this entire kind of area been melted that could actually take a passenger ship. And I thought it was this amazing story, and I must have pitched it to like 12 places, and none of them took it, and I still really wanted to do it. And then luckily Bloomberg Business Week saw what I saw, and they took it, and it was and it worked out really well.
Why don't we take a look at some of your photos? I think that you brought some photos. I want to check them out. It'd be really cool to see what it is that you've brought.
Great.
Let's go check it out.
Okay.
The fun thing about photo shows is to look at photos, and I think that you've got quite a few beautiful ones. Tell me about these puppies.
Yeah, well, so this is a project about dog sled racing in Alaska, and it all started, I had a random assignment for a magazine, Red Bulletin, which is Red Bull's magazine. This is what it looks like there, and I had been covering kind of all over the world, but mostly in kind of the global south. So I'd worked in Asia and the Middle East and Latin America, and I've never been up north. So I was really freaked out and worried about going. Yeah, and now I really like the cold. So I just discovered this whole new world, which is this world of dog mushing and dog sled racing. Mm-hmm. So it's just this entire culture that I had no idea about, and that I could still do a photo story about.
So what was the photo story about? It was just about the dogs,
So the first one was about the Yukon Quest, which is a 1,000-mile dog sled race through the Canadian subarctic all the way to Fairbanks, Alaska, and it's considered to be possibly the toughest endurance race in the world. Okay. So I photographed that,
for the
dogs and the mushers, because the mushers who lead these dog teams, they basically get no sleep. They have to survive out in the wilderness. They have to build fires and camp and kind of fend for themselves throughout the whole thing, and they also have to train these dog teams from birth. So they kind of they have these puppies and they raise and they train them. It was also just so beautiful there. I hadn't really, ever experienced landscapes like this before. So I was sort of blown away. Mm-hmm. And then the dogs.
Of course. Well, how could you? Wow. Okay. I want to go.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And then, kind of also just the hardship that it takes.
Yes, that doesn't look easy.
And the weather, it gets to about -50 sometimes.
Did you have the similar kind of continents on your side?
Exactly. I'm glad that you asked that, because people, you don't realize that that's also me on the other end. I've got the parka.
No, you're dewy and perfect. There's nothing wrong. Your hair is exactly like it is right now.
Yeah. No, it's taken about 3 years for me to kind of perfect how to dress and how to work out there. And it's been a really awesome new challenge, is just figuring out how to photograph in such an extreme weather and such extreme circumstances. So my eyelashes are frozen, and if the camera body touches my nose, it burns because the metal has gotten so cold. So you just sort of along the way, you kind of learn all of these tips and tricks. Mm-hmm. And this was this past year. So I photographed the Iditarod on assignment for National Geographic. So I feel like I've kind of carved out a niche for myself as a dog sled photographer, which is funny.
And how's that make you feel?
I'm great.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You're I'll keep on doing it.
Yeah, it's totally great. But yeah, so another thing about doing this project was that, so I had this random assignment in 2014, but something that really struck me was that something everyone in all of the communities that we went through on this 1,000-mile race talked about was how much warmer it was, and how not only the trail was changing because of the warming weather, but just kind of all of these different challenges that were occurring.
So now instead of mush, they're slush.
Yes.
I got it. I'm sure that joke happened a lot of times.
No, actually, I think that's the first time I've heard it.
Oh God, I'm so good.
Yeah. So it sort of led me to this project that's been one of my main focuses as a photographer, which has been looking at climate change in Alaska. Mm-hmm. And it all came from sort of this random dog sled race assignment. So I'm trying to look a lot at people and animals and their relationship and how that's changing. Mm-hmm. And so different animal species relationships are changing with each other. It's also affecting people. Mm-hmm. And then you've got communities like this one. This is Shishmaref. And it's has to relocate. The entire village is moving. Wow. It's vanishing due to erosion. This is also in Shishmaref. And then just meeting all the different hunters. And something that's interesting that's happening is they're teaching more and more young people these traditions because they're trying to hold on to them. This boy, he's on Facebook and will, watch HBO, post on Facebook, and then go out and hunt caribou. So, they're really trying hard to keep their culture alive.
One of the things you had mentioned to me before was that like going out there also led you to like a long-term project. And I would love to hear more about your long-term projects.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just very committed to these places. So part of it is looking at like the photos from before, these young hunters, and just sort of watching how they evolve. And are they going to stick with these traditions? Are they going to go off to college and not come back? Are they going to go to college and come back with these skills that help their community and, help kind of safeguard their traditions and all of this stuff in the face of all of the challenges brought by climate change? But then also just looking at the geography of places like this, for example. This was overhead in the Arctic Ocean on the way to Point Hope. And 1 month before this, it had been totally frozen over. So something else that I did were these photos where I sort of, was in the area in May, and then I was in the area in June, and the difference was drastic.
Wow, it's 1 month difference.
1 month difference. And, the spring thaw happens. Like, the snow does go away, even in Alaska, but not this fast. It's happening like 3 to 4 months faster. So I feel like over time, I want to just keep taking more and more pictures that I can then put together in sort of these series where you can just kind of really starkly see the difference.
So clearly you chose this project because of your interactions there, and you already saw some of these things. Like, how do you normally like pick up on these things, like stories?
It's oftentimes just comes from being curious. Right. So like curiosity. So this is a series that I did in Mali, and this was after the 2012 conflict there, when jihadists took over the north, and they were about to take over the whole country. But luckily the French intervened, and the country was sort of saved. But all the news stories kept talking about what was going on with women there, but you weren't seeing any photos of women. So that, to me, I was really interested in what had happened to the country. So and then
photojournalist knows that I smell a story.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. Like, and I don't know, it's this vibrant place, and I always loved the music. So then I just went to Mali and just tried to meet women that had been through the wartime, and sort of find women who had experienced it and what their testimonies were, but also women that had been really strong and resisted. The goal was to document this place and what it was and what could be lost. So it was sort of like, it wasn't really a tangible story, but I still managed to do it and publish it. And I just exhibited the work at Princeton.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
So if you wanted to give somebody who wants to become a photojournalist a couple of tips, like things that you wish somebody would have told you when you decided, hey, I want to be a photojournalist, what would those be? Do you have anything that you would tell people?
One really great piece of advice came from a photographer who was a friend and mentor of mine, who was killed in Libya. And we met, I think in 2006 or 2007 at a workshop. And he told me, don't worry about meeting the editors. Don't worry so much about that. Find the photographers that are doing exactly what you want to do and be friends with them or assist them, or just meet other photographers and be nice, be friendly, and eventually one of them is going to have something to do and hand an assignment off to you. Being kind and being friendly and not being competitive with your peers is a really important piece of advice.
A really great piece of advice for anybody in any capacity.
Yeah, exactly.
I know that one of the things that might be, you can imagine that there's individuals out there who would love to go to Mali, but can't afford to do that. Like, what could they do to hone their skills, like building empathy? How do I communicate with people with a different culture, a different language?
And I would say if you're starting out, don't go to Mali. You can do something like a long-term project anywhere. You can find a story literally anywhere, but you just have to take the time. So if you want to be a photojournalist, if you want to be covering events, go to the events anyways and photograph them, and just sort of pretend that is your job and do it. But then also make sure that you have a story or a personal project that you're working on, something over a long period of time.
And I think you mentioned also be curious.
Yeah.
That sounds like a really important thing, like trying to understand, why are things happening this way and what are the different options, the different stories.
And when you mentioned too, being empathetic and having empathy, it shows. If you don't care, I think it shows in the photos.
Yeah. Thank you again, Katie, for coming in. It's been great looking at your photos and chatting with you today. It's been a lot of fun and very inspiring. And thank you for joining us. We'll see you again next week when we have another photographer and another topic. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.